Today I'm going to talk about a book that I made called The Hatchlings. And I made this book a long time ago. It was one of the first books I ever made. Well, I should say one of the first serious books I ever made. So The Hatchlings is a fable about yearning and abandon, madness and love, and I would say mostly about spiritual transformation. This book is like a seed or a prototype for everything that came after. First, I'll talk a bit about what it's about and how I came up with the idea, and then I will discuss a little bit about how I made it and how it sort of fits into everything I did after. So the story, much of it came to me in visions, and it's really hard to explain it all in this video, but much of the experience I detail in my first novel, The Invisible Histories of the Spiral Mountain, and it was quite a complicated affair, I guess. So at the time I was making these collages that were like part pornography, part children's book, part anatomical representations and stickers and just all these different things that I had found. And I was kind of bringing these mythological creatures into existence. It was like my psychology was sort of bringing these out. So I made a lot of these collages, and one of the collages that I made was called The Hatchlings. And it was on black paper, and it had these sort of like baby dinosaurs, I guess is what they were, but they were sort of more like bird dinosaurs. And I ended up doing some mixed media with it, where these stars were sort of coming out of the hatchlings' heads, and that got me to thinking, and eventually I wrote a story that included this sort of iconography. At the time, I was reading a lot of Aleister Crowley, and the Book of the Law had a large impact on the sort of poetics of this story and the imagery. The quote by Aleister Crowley, "Every man and woman is a star," had a lot of bearing on what I was doing at the time, and it just influenced my thinking about how to represent the way that when people fall in love, it can almost mutate them. So some of the inspirations for this were some children's books. Peter Pan was one, a very large inspiration for this, and also a few of the different stories of the Brothers Grimm. I was also greatly influenced by Norse myth, because a few years before this I had taken a Norse myth class in college, at a community college, and that class sort of introduced me into the idea of fable and myth and how you can use it to talk about allegories. So one thing in particular that sort of struck me at the time was the sort of fable of like the unicorn and the maiden. So in many ways that is present in this story. Some of the concepts that I touch on in this are like psychological individuation and the integrating of the shadow, Those are Carl Jung ideas, I guess. And I got those from a book that the person that I fell in love with gave to me called Man and His Symbols. And that book had a profound impact on me also. I was also reading Joseph Campbell at the time, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and The Power of Myth. And as far as the sort of magical side of it, or the magical realism side, I guess, Borges had a profound impact on the story. But most of all, the anthropologist Mircea Eliade, I think that's how you say his name, his idea of like initiation and sort of the shaman going through an illness to become the sort of enlightened individual, that I think was a very interesting concept. And at the time I was devouring all of his books, trying to get a handle on it and to understand it. So when I was writing it, one thing that really had a big impact was Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So it inspired several of the characters, and in this sort of group of fables that I was writing at the time, I had these different characters. One was the dead man and one was the living man, which you could say were sort of inspired by Nietzsche's Overman, the Übermensch. And eventually, those fables ended up working themselves into my first novel. So at the time, I had no idea that they were going to be part of that novel, and I will do a separate video on that. It'll probably be the next one in this series, Behind the Books, that I do. But that might be quite a long video because there's a lot to talk about with that book. But anyway, as far as the writing, it just came really fast. I was really inspired by the love I felt for this person, and it almost was like channeling a muse or some kind of conduit with her. And it really just shows a lot about young love and how there's an insanity that comes with it, and this sort of irresistible longing that can almost bring you to ruin. Another thing that was on my mind was sort of the magnetism of nature, and how when things are happening to you, you don't understand what's going on, but you only you sort of feel like this is only happening to you, and it's maybe only happened to you in history or something. It's kind of a narcissistic thing, I guess, but I'm sure most people have felt it, especially when you're in love. It seems like there's nothing, like no one's been in love the way that you've been in love, especially when you're young. So I would say this book was actually quite difficult to make because at the time I didn't have the know-how to make a book. I later went to university, to college, to learn how to make books, book binding and book design. But at the time I had no idea how to do it. So there was a lot of like pushing around in the dark, trying to figure out how I could actually make it without the know-how to make it correctly. And it meant a lot to me, so I really wanted to get it right. Eventually I took a summer class, which was about, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks long, at the Center for Creative Studies, which is now called the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan. And during it, I learned how to do intaglio printing, really basic intaglio printing. So I had to make plates for it, etched plates. And I was using the collages that I made, but then I ended up making these sort of drawings based off the collages. And what I did is I printed the intaglio plates, and then I had all these pages, but I didn't really know how to bind them together. So it took some time and some research, and eventually I kind of just did it myself without much instruction. And you can kind of tell. It looks good for what it is, but it's not super functional. I mean, it kind of opens up all the way, but it was me trying for something beyond my means, I guess. But what it did do is it made me realize that that's what I wanted to do with my life. So in that regard, I find it very important and a turning point. After I had the intaglio pages, I ended up hand watercoloring them and then doing some gold leaf on them. And then I had to cut them down and bind it, and it was really difficult because I didn't even know what to use. I mean, I had never bound a book before, and I didn't even know about book board or book cloth. All that stuff I had to research and figure out how to do. And this was like right when the internet was getting started, so it wasn't like I could just find the information on the internet. It was actually quite hard. So eventually I finished it, and there were 2 copies, I believe, and I gave one to her, and then I kept the other one. And I don't have it with me in Korea, where I live. It's actually in America. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about it today and just sort of say that if you ever see this video, I'm not going to say your name because you probably don't want to be named, but if you ever see this, thank you for inspiring me so much. Have a good day.